The phone rang just as I was about to sink into the couch with my favorite book. I glanced at the caller ID. Daniel. Sighing, I answered, "Hey, what's up?" "Laura, while you were away, I moved my parents' stuff in." Daniel's voice, casual and unapologetic, hit me like a thunderclap. "What do you mean?" My heart raced, and I sat upright, abandoning my book. "I told you we should have them live with us. They're here now." I felt the room spin. "Daniel, we never agreed on this. How could you decide this alone while I'm visiting Uncle John?" Daniel scoffed. "Come on, Laura, it's not a big deal. Besides, I figured you wouldn't mind." Mind? The audacity of his assumption left me speechless. This house, our home, was suddenly invaded by his unilateral decision. "Daniel, we need to talk about this." "No need, just stay there a bit longer. Honestly, it might be better if you don't come back at all." His words stung, a cold dismissal that echoed in the now silent room. I had always known Daniel was headstrong, but this blatant disregard for our partnership, for me, was a new low. "All right then, Daniel." "If that's what you want," I replied, my voice steady, belying the storm inside. There was a pause, a moment of uncertainty. "You're okay with this?" "Yes, Daniel. I guess it's time for me to move on anyway." The call ended abruptly, leaving me alone with my thoughts. For a moment, I let the hurt wash over me, the pain of being so easily discarded. But then, a flicker of resolve sparked within me. I remembered the plan Uncle John and I had discussed, a contingency for just such a betrayal. I reached for my phone again, my fingers deftly composing an email to a contact who could set our plan in motion. As I hit send, a sense of empowerment surged through me. Daniel thought he could easily upend my life, but I wasn't going to let him have the last word. The house we shared, it was more than just walls and a roof. It was the embodiment of my dreams, my efforts. Daniel might have believed he could just push me out, but he was in for a surprise. Uncle John's advice echoed in my mind. "Always be 2 steps ahead, Laura." I started packing my things, each item a memory, a piece of the life I thought I had. But as I folded my clothes and gathered my belongings, I realized something. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. I was no longer the naive girl who fell for Daniel's charm. I was Laura, strong and capable, and I was about to show Daniel that underestimating me was his biggest mistake. I closed my suitcase, my heart steady and my mind clear. It was time to face what was coming, and I was ready. I left the house under the cover of dawn, the first light casting long shadows on the path that had once led me to a shared dream. As I drove away, my mind wandered back to the days before Daniel, before the disillusionment. I had always been a bit of a dreamer, finding solace in the quiet corners of life. Growing up in a modest home with loving parents, I learned early on the value of hard work and the joy of simple pleasures. My mother, a talented home cook, had instilled in me a love for nutrition and healthy living. Her sudden passing during my teenage years left a void, one that I filled by immersing myself in studies, eventually leading me to become a dietitian. College was a blur of textbooks and late-night study sessions, but it was at a college reunion that I met Daniel. He was charismatic, the life of the party, and when his eyes met mine, I felt a spark that I had never experienced before. Our whirlwind romance was like something out of a fairy tale, and before I knew it, I was walking down the aisle, promising to spend my life with him. Our early days of marriage were filled with laughter and love. Daniel, with his job in marketing, seemed to be the perfect counterpart to my more grounded nature. But as the years passed, the laughter faded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. Daniel's charm had masked a deeper, more unsettling trait, his obsession with status and wealth. His comments on my salary, once infrequent, became a constant refrain. "You'd think a dietitian would earn more," he'd say, a sneer in his voice. I brushed off these remarks, focusing instead on our son, Alex, who was growing into a thoughtful and intelligent young man. Alex, much like me, found his father's materialistic views troubling. He had ambitions of going to a top university, dreams that I wholeheartedly supported. Daniel, however, seemed more concerned with how Alex's choices would reflect on him rather than on what was best for our son. It was during one of our heated arguments about Alex's future that I realized how far Daniel and I had drifted apart. "He needs to aim for a prestigious college, Laura. It's about our family's reputation," Daniel insisted. "But it's Alex's future, Daniel. Shouldn't we support what he wants?" I countered, frustration evident in my voice. Daniel's dismissive attitude that night was a turning point for me. I knew then that something had to change, and so I found myself confiding in Uncle John, my mother's brother, and a wise confidant. It was he who helped me see the importance of standing up for myself and Alex. Together we devised a plan, a way to ensure that no matter what Daniel did, I would be able to protect my son and myself. As I drove towards Uncle John's house, the rising sun casting a warm glow over the horizon, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was not just a retreat. It was a step towards a future where I was no longer a bystander in my own life. It was time for Daniel to see that the quiet, unassuming Laura he thought he knew was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who wouldn't back down. Uncle John's home was a sanctuary, a place where I could gather my thoughts and plan my next steps. Over cups of steaming coffee, we sat at his old oak table, plotting. Uncle John, with his years of experience in law and a keen understanding of human nature, was the perfect ally. "You need to think about the long game, Laura," he advised, his eyes serious. "Daniel thinks he's outsmarted you, but we'll turn the tables on him." We discussed various strategies considering legal and financial aspects. Uncle John suggested transferring certain assets to my name and documenting all of Daniel's actions, should the situation escalate to legal proceedings. Throughout our discussions, my phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Daniel, ranging from dismissive to outright hostile. "You're overreacting, Laura. Just come back and we'll forget all this," read one. "You're being childish. Remember, I'm the one with the high-paying job," taunted another. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the plan. It wasn't just about getting back at Daniel. It was about securing a future for Alex and me. The thought of Alex brought a pang of guilt. He was preparing for his college entrance exams, and this upheaval was the last thing he needed. I called him, explaining as much as I could without burdening him further. "Mom, I get it. Dad's been different." Alex's voice was mature beyond his years. "Don't worry about me. I'm with Grandma and Grandpa. Focus on what you need to do." Hearing his words, I felt a mix of pride and sadness. My son was growing up in a broken home, yet he was showing more resilience and understanding than many adults. A few days turned into a week and then 2. Uncle John and I refined our strategy, ensuring every base was covered. We planned for the worst, but hoped for the best. The aim was to confront Daniel with a fait accompli, a situation where he had no choice but to acquiesce to our terms. Meanwhile, I kept up with work remotely, grateful for understanding colleagues and a flexible job. The normalcy of work was a welcome distraction, but every evening, as I sat in Uncle John's study, the reality of my situation sank in. Daniel, once the man I thought I would spend my life with, was now someone I barely recognized. His greed and selfishness had eroded the love I once felt, leaving in its wake a determination to protect what was rightfully mine, my dignity, my son's future, and my peace of mind. As I prepared to return to New York, I felt a sense of clarity. The path ahead would not be easy, but I was no longer the woman who left that house weeks ago. I was stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever Daniel threw my way. The journey back to New York was a quiet one, filled with a mix of apprehension and resolve. The city's skyline, once a symbol of shared dreams and aspirations, now loomed like a battleground. As Uncle John drove, his steady presence was a reassuring reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. The plan was simple, yet bold. We would confront Daniel with the reality of his actions and the consequences that awaited him. Uncle John had already laid the groundwork, consulting with legal experts and ensuring that everything was in place for a seamless execution. Upon arriving home, the sight of moving boxes and unfamiliar cars parked outside was jarring. Daniel's parents, unaware of the impending storm, greeted me with polite smiles. "Laura, it's good to have you back," Daniel's mother said, a hint of unease in her voice. Daniel, however, was nowhere to be seen. His absence was both a relief and a frustration. I needed to face him, to look him in the eye and let him know that his days of controlling our lives were over. The house felt different, as if it had lost its warmth. Daniel's parents had made themselves comfortable, but the atmosphere was tense, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken conflict. I retreated to my room, the same room where I had packed my bags weeks ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. I unpacked my suitcase, each item a symbol of the new life I was carving out for myself and Alex. That evening, as I sat at the dinner table with Daniel's parents, the conversation was strained. They spoke of Daniel in glowing terms, oblivious to his manipulative ways. I nodded and smiled, keeping my true feelings hidden. The time for revelations was not yet here. Later that night, Daniel finally returned. He was surprised to see me, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. "Laura, you're back," he said, his tone a mix of surprise and annoyance. "Yes, Daniel, we need to talk," I replied, my voice calm but firm. He scoffed. "What's there to talk about? You left, remember?" I stood my ground. "It's about the house, Daniel, and our future." Daniel laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the empty room. "What about it? You think you can just come back and everything will be as it was?" "No, Daniel, things will never be the same, but you need to understand something. This house, it's not just yours to decide on." His expression changed, a hint of worry creeping in. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, ready to lay out the reality he was about to face. "This house, it's in my name too, and I've been talking to a lawyer. We have options, Daniel, and none of them look good for you." For a moment, Daniel was speechless. The confident, controlling man I had known was gone, replaced by someone who realized he was no longer in control. "This is just the beginning, Daniel. You thought you could push me out, make decisions without me. But I'm not the same person you thought you could manipulate. I'm fighting back, for me and for Alex." Daniel's face hardened, the reality of the situation setting in. "You can't do this, Laura. I won't let you." But I was resolute. "It's already done, Daniel. You've made your choices, and now you have to live with them." As I left him standing there, a mix of anger and disbelief on his face, I knew that the hardest part was yet to come. But I was ready to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my son's future. The following days were a whirlwind of activity and tense exchanges. Daniel oscillated between anger, disbelief, and desperate attempts to regain control. But with Uncle John's guidance and my newfound resolve, I navigated each challenge with a clarity I never knew I possessed. Daniel's parents, caught in the middle, were a source of unexpected sympathy. His mother, particularly, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. "Laura, I never realized things were this bad between you two," she confided one afternoon, her eyes filled with concern. "It's been building up for a while," I admitted, finding solace in her understanding. Our conversation was a reminder that Daniel's actions affected more than just us. As the day of reckoning approached, I prepared myself for the final confrontation. Uncle John had arranged for a meeting with Daniel, his parents, and our respective lawyers. The goal was to settle matters as amicably as possible, given the circumstances. The meeting was held in a neutral location, a stark conference room that mirrored the cold reality of our situation. Daniel was already there when I arrived, his posture rigid, his face a mask of defiance. "Let's just get this over with," he muttered as I took my seat opposite him. The lawyers laid out the facts. The house, purchased with contributions from both of our families, was legally co-owned. Daniel's unilateral decisions and his recent behavior had put him in a precarious legal position. As the reality of his situation dawned on him, Daniel's facade began to crumble. He looked at me, a mix of anger and desperation in his eyes. "Laura, please. We can work this out. Just come back home." But the home he spoke of no longer existed, not for me. "Daniel, you made your choices. Now I'm making mine. It's over." The negotiations were tense but straightforward. We agreed to sell the house and divide the proceeds. Daniel's parents would move to a smaller place, and I would start afresh, somewhere new, somewhere where the shadows of the past couldn't reach. As the meeting concluded, Daniel's mother approached me, her eyes moist with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Laura. I'm sorry for everything." I hugged her, a gesture of mutual forgiveness and understanding. "Take care of yourself," I whispered. Leaving the conference room, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The battle was over, and though the road ahead was uncertain, I was free. Free from Daniel's control, free to build a new life for Alex and myself. The drive back to Uncle John's house was a quiet one. I looked out the window, the city passing by in a blur. I thought of Alex, of the bright future he had ahead of him, and of the new chapter I was about to begin. Uncle John broke the silence. "You did well, Laura. I'm proud of you. Thank you, Uncle John, for everything." As we drove on, the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the city. It felt like a promise of new beginnings and brighter days ahead. Months had passed since the day I walked away from that conference room, away from a life that was no longer mine. With each passing day, the sense of liberation and self-discovery grew stronger. I was rebuilding my life, piece by piece, on my own terms. The house sold quicker than we had anticipated. With my share of the proceeds, I bought a quaint apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a place where Alex and I could start anew. The walls were adorned with memories, both old and new, each telling the story of our journey. Alex had excelled in his exams, earning a place at his desired university. His resilience and determination were a source of immense pride. We often talked about his future, his dreams, and I saw in his eyes the same hope and ambition that had driven me through my darkest days. I found solace in my work, diving into community nutrition programs and workshops. My experiences had ignited a passion for helping others, for sharing the lessons I had learned about self-care and resilience. Occasionally, I heard news about Daniel through mutual acquaintances. He had moved into a smaller place. His lifestyle drastically changed. There was no joy in hearing of his struggles, only a quiet acknowledgement that the choices we make shape our lives. Uncle John remained a pillar of support, his wisdom and guidance a constant in my life. We often met for coffee, discussing everything from politics to philosophy. He had been more than just a mentor through my ordeal. He had become a true friend. As I sat in my new living room, the evening sun casting a warm glow through the window, I reflected on the journey I had been through. The pain, the betrayal, the fight for my rights, it had all led me to this moment, a moment of peace and contentment. I had learned that strength comes not from what we endure, but from how we rise above it. I had faced my fears, stood up for myself and my son, and in doing so, had found a sense of purpose and self-worth that no one could take away. The phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. It was Alex, his voice bright and full of excitement. "Mom, I got an internship. It's exactly what I was hoping for." I smiled, my heart swelling with pride. "That's wonderful, Alex. I'm so proud of you." As we chatted, I realized this was what true happiness felt like. It wasn't about a perfect life. It was about a life lived with integrity, resilience, and love. The chapter with Daniel had closed, but a new one was just beginning. A chapter filled with hope, possibilities, and the promise of a future crafted by our own hands. And so, as the sun set, casting long shadows across the room, I knew that no matter what the future held, Alex and I would face it together, stronger and wiser than ever before.